That's all.
We need a number.
Number one.
I'm at a loss.
Could I ask one thing of you, sweetheart? I'd like to know what is the first thing, your first memory. What is the first thing you ever remember?
First thing I ever remember of anything.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know. I think that probably in Mother's darkroom, playing with toys, learning what the strange word depot means. And I used to love to be in the darkroom, and it was kind of mysterious there with this red light, and to see the image develop. I remember I was so short that I could just peer about table height, and I'd look right into the trays, you see, and I could see the image developing. And it was then that I stuck my finger in the hypo to see what it tasted like. It wouldn't have hurt me a bit because sodium thiosulfate is every drugstore has it for prescriptions, but Mother didn't know that, and she washed my mouth out with soap. It's very difficult to find a camera that covers the entire negative image with what you see. But the precision Nikon camera certainly does that. Furthermore, I discovered that this particular camera, there are probably others too, give me a perfectly clear rectangle through which I can work and discover compositions. I can easily revolve the camera around, rotate it for horizontals or verticals or whatever I want. And then at the very instant that I have found a picture to my liking, I simply press the shutter, and there we have the, once we wind the film on, and then there I have it fixed forever. I don't think this camera is suitable for everything. If I were an architectural photographer, primarily recording the building itself, then I would, of course, want to use a much larger camera. But it's not my idea to record buildings, but impressions of buildings, and to find in what lies around us, whether it's given to us by nature or built by man or a combination of the two, is very exciting, and there I find pictures that please me very much.
I wanted to ask you, I think the most often asked question to photographers is that whether you move things or not.
Well, of course, I move myself, first of all, and that's absolutely essential. Then my approach is I like to find things rather than to arrange things. And that, to me, is the excitement. It was partly that feeling that led me to call my book of photographs In Plain Sight. I don't like to contrive subjects. I don't like to build things just to be photographed. I want to photograph what's there, but it would be absurd for me to say that I don't arrange things. I wouldn't hesitate to move a piece of furniture, but I wouldn't want to say, oh, go upstairs and get that Victorian chair with the carved back to it. That'll be ideal for this particular situation. To me, that spoils all the excitement of discovery of what's there. Can you work with what is available? One of my photographs can be explained by partially answering your question, and that's a photograph I made back in 1940 with a view camera of a rock at Point Lobos on which there are a number of broken shells, clam shells. I did not put the shells there. Seagulls put the shells there. They would dig them up out of the sand at low tide and then circle around and drop the shells and swoop down and eat the meat that had been broken because the shells were broken. At the time I made this photograph, I was very much interested in surrealism, and indeed I was one of the crew at the Museum of Modern Art that put together the exhibition of surrealism back in the mid-30s. And one of the tenets of the surrealist aesthetic is to rely upon the laws of chance. And for example, Marx Ernst or Marcel Duchamp would climb up on a stepladder and drop pieces of string on a canvas that was covered with a gluey substance. And just wherever the strings fell, they were permanently fastened to the canvas. And that was a picture. Well, in a certain sense, this photograph of the shells was created by the law of chance. Now, nobody looking at that photograph is going to have any conception of that or that what went on through my mind. But it's a photograph that people seem to like, so I can't make any real definite rules about this. But to me, the least interference is, to me, significant.
In 1970, you made this self-portrait in the Museum of Modern Art that seems to be so interesting and so unique in your whole body of work because it has so many levels to it with the reflections and has such an incredible abstract quality. What was happening here when you decided to make this photograph?
Well, you see, I call it a self-portrait, and that requires a little explanation. In 1970, I was invited by the Museum of Modern Art to come back and put together an exhibition of photographs of the 1920s. We called it Photo Eye of the 20s, and we had also films, Kino Eye of the 20s. And I designed the gallery. We actually rebuilt the gallery to my specifications. And I wanted to make a record of the show, so I went out on 53rd Street and looked through the window along with the passers-by. You see, I designed it specially so that people could look in and see what's going on. Most shows, they cover up the windows with walls. And this is what I saw. There's a lot more than in the photograph than what I actually saw, because I had no idea that there would be such a terrific counterplay of reflections and direct visions through, and that white square in the upper right-hand corner is a projected slide of a photograph by the Russian constructivist L. Lisitsky, a picture that I've always felt was one of the great photo montage. Why did we have a slide in this photographic exhibition? Well, the answer is very simple. It was impossible to get an original print of this particular picture. We tried making an excellent copy, but making a show, every copy pulls down the original vintage prints. And so we had this projected setup here, and slides changed every 10 or 15 seconds, and it was an attraction to the passerby.
You just said something that I find very interesting, that when you took this photograph, you didn't really see all of the goings-on until after the negative was developed and you viewed the print. Is that something that's incorporated into your way of working, that you expect to find things that you didn't see at first?
I don't incorporate it into my work. It happens, and I've come to, you see, my approach is very intuitive, and well, a very good example is to be found in this particular photograph. There's something in this picture that I never saw myself, and a friend pointed it out in this very print, that in the middle of the gallery at the Museum of Modern Art, there is a sign that says, "Sorry, full."
Yeah.
That is the reflection of a sign in the parking lot opposite. And to me, it's not inside at all. It's reflected by the plate glass mirror. This I find to be a wonderful thing about photography, and as far as, to my mind, it is unique to photography, because the camera records, or it can record, everything even beyond what one sees. Now, to take a painter, for example, can only put down on canvas what he sees or what he imagines. But he can't discover, after he's made the painting, that something is in there that he hadn't planned, or imagined, or put in. And over and again, I find in my photographs that the camera is telling me, is showing me things. And so to me, the camera is, in a sense, a tool for vision. It forces one to concentrate upon what happens within a frame, the rectangle of the picture.
No, you've also been doing a lot of work with color photography. I know a project you've been working on for the past 2 years has been photographing the garden, the beautiful garden that's here right outside the studio. What happened? How was that? Was it a switch to color, or are you actively working both in color and black and white? And how do you decide when to use which?
The film sees nature somewhat differently than we do. There are certain colors that it favors and even exaggerates. And I feel that to go around photographing with color film, hoping that you will be able to reproduce reality, is a rather futile thing, because it overlooks the possibilities of color photography to exaggerate and to make its own kind of image. You know, you probably heard the old story about Whistler painting a sunset, and some passerby looking at the canvas and saying, "Well, I never saw a sunset like this." And he answered, "Don't you wish you had?" And I've tried to follow what the whole technology offers. It's rather difficult to describe, but that has been my approach.
Many of the photographs in the garden series do not have that critical sharpness that we're so used to seeing when we see flower pictures. Is that done purposely, or does it have to do with the wind or the movement? What are your thoughts about the sharpness?
I can't make it as simple as that. I think I've pointed out that I rely a great deal upon what happens, and the ability to sense it. What is happening is I don't know. I mean, it's what is art, and I can't define it. I can only show it in my work. Oh yes, there's a school of photographers who feel that any part of the picture that is not sharp makes it a useless photograph, and absolutely everything must be sharp. I don't believe that, and I like to quote one of the great 19th century photographers, Julia Margaret Cameron, whose portraits amongst the finest ever made with the camera. And she complained to a very dear and close friend, the scientist, Sir John Herschel, the man to whom all we photographers owe the suggestion of fixing photographs with the chemical sodium thiosulfate. She wrote to him a letter in which she said that she was not interested in photographs, the topographical mere map making of the features of the face, without that roundness and fullness of flesh and limb that only my focus can give, although condemned and called out of focus. What is focus, and who has the right to say what focus is correct? And to me, that is a kind of it's a very important remark. Who does have the right to say, that's no good, it's not in sharp focus? I think that's simplistic. And I hope that my photographs show it.
In looking at some of your portraits, there's a very intimate quality. I mean, I know a lot of that is because a lot of the subjects, the people who you've chosen to photograph, were friends or associates. But there's also a very intense contact. What was happening here when you did this portrait of Ansel Adams at Rancho State House?
We were both taking a break during the filming of a TV documentary on Ansel Adams. And the film director had chosen the Rancho State House as the place for a conversation between the two of us because this was the area of Ansel was very fond of. Some of his earliest photographs were made there. He was a guest of Mabel Dodge back in those days when there was such a great and wonderful art renaissance really taking place in this New Mexican town. And as we just walked around, I suddenly saw how his Western hat fits into the adobe architecture of the church there, and interrupted our conversation, and there it is. Ansel is not easy to photograph because most photographers are difficult to photograph because he will put on a smile for you, but happily this is just a very natural picture of a very close friend.
Now, when you made this portrait of Henri CartierBresson, I know that you were on assignment to do an interview with him.
The magazine Popular Photography asked me to do a profile. So I interviewed him and I did this piece. And then they asked Henri for a portrait to go with reproductions of, say, half a dozen of his photographs, and he said he didn't have one. Asked Beaumont, and so they asked me to make this picture. At the present time, CartierBresson does not want his portrait taken at all. But back in '46, he didn't have this feeling, and this is really a record of a friendship. He had just bought a new lens for his Leica, which was the Sumerex of aperture f1.5 and 85 millimeters. Well, back in those days, we'd never heard of such a powerful lens of that focal length. And in the midst of the shooting session, I must have taken about 8 or 9 exposures. He said, "Look, try my lens on your camera, Beaumont," and this is the result. He is a very intense man, and when he is photographing, nothing on earth will stand in his way to get the photographs that he wants. He has developed this extraordinary ability to recognize in a fraction of a second a composition that is absolutely satisfying at the same time, tells a very strong story. He works entirely with a 35mm camera. He's now living in Paris, right beside the Louvre, and he's spending most of his time drawing and painting. But he is one of the great photographers. I hardly knew him at the time that I made this picture.
Do you have your camera handy? I thought we could go out into the garden, maybe see what's out there.
It's going to be noisy. Can't help it.
Do you need help?
We have to break here because I have to de-microphone myself. Back in the days of the Renaissance, Alberti, who was one of the first to write about the subject, said whenever I make a painting, I choose a rectangle of the proper size, which I consider to be a window through which the objects are seen. And what is that, after all, but a description of what this or any other camera can do? And I have just, in the last few years, I've found that this particular camera is a very comfortable tool and gives me opportunities that I've not been able to reach with other types of cameras. I had for some time a Rolleiflex camera. That image is square, which I find rather bothersome. And it's usually held at waist level, whereas I want to see things at eye level. And to follow my vision, or to really control my own vision through that of the camera. Now I make this picture, but I think we'll be able to improve on that picture by getting a little lower viewpoint and getting much closer, so that I'm including this the tree and its bark. In the distance, I see the house. I don't want the sky, because I know that that's going to predominate. So we'll tip the camera down, and what's happening now is that I have an almost impossible subject, but it's great, because there are two yellow flowers that are dominating in the foreground. That's a very, very short distance away. Question, can I possibly hold this and get, at the same time, some kind of definition? Well, with this camera, I can see precisely what's going to happen through the viewfinder. And I've got a chap in the foreground, and I think I'll take that picture so we can have a look at that one. That was pretty dangerous at 1/30th of a second, but the seems to be absolute motionless flowers on this very beautiful early morning. Now I'm going to get up a little higher, and now I'm putting one yellow flower in the corner. The thing is sort of on a diagonal. It's strange, so much of my work is on the diagonal. I don't plan it that way, but that's what seems to happen. And there we have another photograph of this particular group of flowers. There, I'm absolutely filling the frame with this particular bloom. So we'll make that exposure of it. Now, I'd like just to show you what happens if I get close up to the daisy. Here we have a little variation on the theme. It's a perfectly formed daisy, and there's a bud that has spent its life that is just clustered near it. Oh, I guess that bud is that bud is a growing bud. I
And
want
here
to do
comes the
that
light.
again. And here comes the light. Now, you see, with my automatic, I don't need to worry, because a minute ago it was a 2/50th, now it's 500. That means that I'm giving it half the exposure that I made only a few seconds ago. And that's why I like this automatic feature that we spoke about. Now these are really coming to life. And this particular picture I want to do in two ways. One way, I'm using a large opening to my camera. And just think of it, this exposure meter tells me to give an exposure of 1/2000th of a second, and it tells me that even that is too much exposure. So I cut down now. I can go down as far as f/16, and now I can get some details in the background. You see, there's going to be a quite different picture now, made at a 2/50th of a second. One has to study the blurred areas. You're working as close as this. The depth of field is very, very critical indeed. And unless you get an uncluttered background, and a background that can be read, the picture is going to be very disappointing. But maybe now, when the sun is coming out, we can get this particular red blossom here that really fascinates me against that tree. Now, I could get so close to this that I'm having nothing but the bark of the tree and the red flower. I've had to, my exposure was automatically changed now to the 30th of a second, and not much problem with depth of field because this red flower is a couple of inches away. What I like is to really get into the underbrush, so to speak. Now I've got these little, I'm going to call them buttercups, I don't know what they are. These little tiny blooms, they're only about half an inch apart, but I think that we'll find that they will become gigantic and that they will really can be put alongside photographs that I've made of blooms that are 10 times bigger. Here's a nice composition. I'm looking at the great distance, and the sky occupies about the top third of the picture, and slashing across it these yellow blooms, and right at, I see, almost as if they were floating in air, a couple of red blossoms. I wonder if that's going to be. I think I probably better, no, I think we can do that, although the lighting is not particularly brilliant at the moment. However, we have an echo of this particular, now I'm moving just a little bit over to the right here because I see things that really fascinate me, and that is the same blooms in the extreme distance, not the blooms, the whole plants in the extreme distance, and they kind of echo what we see now in the foreground. The horizontal perhaps would be a little better. It's a little bit, no, I don't like the horizontal in this case. I want to do it vertically, and there's an exposure for us to look at.
What time of day do you usually photograph in the garden?
I like the either just after dawn or just before sunset. That when the rays of the light are becoming more and more horizontal, or less and less, whatever. But I I don't think we can categorically say anything about that, because some subjects are best done at noon. For example, one of the great photographs by Alfred Stieglitz is taken on board an ocean liner as it was at anchor in Plymouth, England. It was obviously taken at noon, and light comes straight down on the steerage passengers and emphasizes very vividly spots of light that Stieglitz recollected he saw at the time of exposure.
So there's not good light, there's just good photographs.
I think that's a pretty good answer to that question, yes. Now, we haven't done anything with the beautiful white birch or aspen here, and I'd just like to try one thing a little different than we've done before. Looking down at a height, and, holding the cameras there. Now, this picture I don't think is going to give us the sense of scale of the other picture. There's just a wealth. We've done nothing with the, nothing to emphasize the beauty of the leaves. You see?
No, it's so silvery on one side, it seems, I guess.
Just to get, now we have competition with the stonework. We must, there, now I think this might be a very interesting picture. I hadn't thought of having the pavement on which we're standing becoming a background. It'll be interesting when we see this photograph if people realize that the stem is at an angle of 45 degrees. It looks like Blossom put in a support against a stone wall, but it isn't that at all. That's another thing about photography that always has interested me, is the sense of orientation. As we have said, if I photograph, well, as an excellent example right in front of me there, if I photograph with the axis of the camera vertical, objects that are vertical, it makes a picture that is relatively satisfactory to our sense of gravity. We got a funny one here with the dog in the foreground and these lovely, lovely little saplings. Now, if I photograph that, suppose that I just take this on a diagonal. Now, as I look through it, I am seeing the trees vertical, in spite of the fact that in the picture, they will be at 45 degrees. And we've got something here that's going to be probably an unsatisfactory picture, because we say, well, you can't be trees growing out of the ground because they aren't they aren't vertical. And that is an extreme example that I just made, just in order to have a look at it. Once we are not in this particular position and seeing the actuality itself, we have to free ourselves from that experience. We are working to make pictures within a rectangle, and not necessarily what we see. I don't care whether this picture upsets people because the trees are growing at an angle. If it upsets, if people like it, And if I like it in particular, then I think it's a satisfactory picture.
Well, that's something I noticed the other day. I mean, usually when we're ready to take a photograph, it's either horizontal or vertical, and we'll walk around the subject. When I was watching you photograph, you're actually looking through the camera and rotating the camera and looking at the composition in that fashion.
Oh, well,
And
I think that's just as you were speaking, I saw a picture that might be fun to look at. That, of course, is people often say that, do you make a lot of photographs and pick out one that's the best? Well, the answer to that is yes, but it's not haphazard. Over and again, I find in my photographs that the camera is telling me, is showing me things. And so to me, the camera is, in a sense, a tool for vision. Oh yes, there's a school of photographers who feel that any part of the picture that is not sharp makes it a useless photograph, and absolutely everything must be sharp. I don't believe that. What is focus, and who has the right to say what focus is correct? And also, don't be afraid of exploring with your camera what's up and what's down. And what's happening now is that I have an almost impossible subject, but it's great. You know, you probably heard the old story about Whistler painting a sunset, and some passerby looking at the canvas and saying, well, I never saw a sunset like this. And he answered, don't you wish you had? I never saw a sunset like this. And he answered, don't you wish you had?